Book 3, Chapter 13 of Resurrection. The stove had burned up and got warm, the tea was made and poured out into mugs and cups, and milk was added to it. Rusks, fresh rye and wheat bread, hard-boiled eggs, butter and a calf's head and feet were placed on the cloth. Everybody moved towards the part of the shelf beds which took the place of the table, and sat eating and talking. Rintseva sat on a box, pouring out the tea. The rest crowded round her. Only Kryltzoff, who had taken off his wet cloak and wrapped himself in his dry plaid, and lay in his own place, talking to Nekhludoff. After the cold and damp march, and the dirt and disorder they had found there, and after the pains they had taken to get it tidy, after having drunk hot tea and eaten, they were all in the best and brightest of spirits. The fact that the tramp of feet, the screams and abuse of the criminals, reached them through the wall, reminding them of their surroundings, seemed only to increase the sense of coziness. As on an island in the midst of the sea, these people felt themselves for a brief interval not swamped by the degradation and sufferings which surrounded them. This made their spirits rise and excited them. They talked about everything except their present position and that which awaited them. Then, as it generally happens among young men, and women especially, if they are forced to remain together, as these people were, all sorts of agreements and disagreements and attractions, curiously blended, had sprung up among them. Almost all of them were in love. Novodvorov was in love with a pretty, smiling Grabetz. This Grabetz was a young, thoughtless girl who had gone in for a course of study, perfectly indifferent to revolutionary questions, but succumbing to the influence of the day, she compromised herself in some way and was exiled. The chief interest of her life, during the time of her trial in prison and in exile, was her success with men, just as it had been when she was free. Now on the way she comforted herself with the fact that Novodvorov had taken a fancy to her, and she fell in love with him. Vera Dukova, who was very prone to fall in love herself, but did not awaken love in others, though she was always hoping for mutual love, was sometimes drawn to Nabatoff, then to Novodvorov. Kryltzoff felt something like love for Mary Pavlovna. He loved her with a man's love, but knowing how she regarded this sort of love, hid his feelings under the guise of friendship and gratitude for the tenderness with which she attended to his wants. Nabatoff and Rintseva were attached to each other by very complicated ties. Just as Mary Pavlovna was a perfectly chaste maiden, in the same way Rintseva was perfectly chaste as her own husband's wife. When only a schoolgirl of 16, she fell in love with Rintsev, a student of the Petersburg University, and married him before he left the university, when she was only 19 years old. During his 4th year at the university, her husband had become involved in the students' rows, was exiled from Petersburg, and turned revolutionist. She left the medical courses she was attending, followed him, and also turned revolutionist. If she had not considered her husband the cleverest and best of men, she would not have fallen in love with him, and if she had not fallen in love, would not have married. But having fallen in love and married him, whom she thought the best and cleverest of men, she naturally looked upon life and its aims in the way the best and cleverest of men looked at them. At first he thought the aim of life was to learn, and she looked upon study as the aim of life. He became a revolutionist, and so did she. She could demonstrate very clearly that the existing state of things could not go on, and that it was everybody's duty to fight this state of things, and to try to bring about conditions in which the individual could develop freely, etc. And she imagined that she really thought and felt all this, but in reality She only regarded everything her husband thought as absolute truth, and only sought for perfect agreement, perfect identification of her own soul with his, which alone could give her full moral satisfaction. The parting with her husband and their child, whom her mother had taken, was very hard to bear, but she bore it firmly and quietly, because it was for her husband's sake, and for that cause which she had not the slightest doubt was true, since he served it. She was always with her husband in thoughts, and did not love and could not love any other any more than she had done before, but Nabotov's devoted and pure love touched and excited her. This moral, firm man, her husband's friend, tried to treat her as a sister, but something more appeared in his behaviour to her, and this something frightened them both, and yet gave colour to their life of hardship. So that in all this circle only Mary Pavlovna and Kondratiev were quite free from love affairs. End of Book 3, Chapter 13. Book 3, Chapter 14 of Resurrection. Expecting to have a private talk with Katusha, as usual after tea, Nekhludoff sat by the side of Kryltsov, conversing with him. Among other things, he told him the story of Makar's crime, and about his request to him. Kryltsov listened attentively, gazing at Nekhludoff with glistening eyes. "Yes," said Kryltsov suddenly, "I often think that here we are going side by side with them, and who are they? The same for whose sake we are going, and yet we not only do not know them, but do not even wish to know them, and they, even worse than that, they hate us and look upon us as enemies. This is terrible." "There is nothing terrible about it," broke in Novodvorov. "The masses always worship power only. The government is in power, and they worship it and hate us. Tomorrow we shall have the power, and they will worship us," he said with his grating voice. At that moment a volley of abuse and the rattle of chains sounded from behind the wall. Something was heard thumping against it, and screaming and shrieking. Someone was being beaten, and someone was calling out, "Murder, help!" "Hear them, the beasts! What intercourse can there be between us and such as them?" quietly remarked Novodvorov. "You call them beasts, and Nekhludoff was just telling me about such an action," irritably retorted Kryltsov, and went on to say how Makar was risking his life to save a fellow villager. "That is not the action of a beast, it is heroism." "Sentimentality!" Novodvorov ejaculated ironically. "It is difficult for us to understand the emotions of these people and the motives on which they act. You see generosity in the act, and it may be simply jealousy of that other criminal." "How is it that you never wish to see anything good in another?" Mary Pavlovna said suddenly, flaring up. "How can one see what does not exist? How does it not exist when a man risks dying a terrible death?" "I think," said Novodvorov, "that if we mean to do our work, the first condition is that—" Here Kondratiev put down the book he was reading by the lamplight, and began to listen attentively to his master's words. "We should not give way to fancy, but look at things as they are. We should do all in our power for the masses, and expect nothing in return. The masses can only be the object of our activity, but cannot be our fellow workers as long as they remain in that state of inertia they are in at present," he went on, as if delivering a lecture. "Therefore, to expect help from them before the process of development, that process which we are preparing them for, has taken place, is an illusion." "What process of development?" Kryltsov began, flushing all over. "We say that we are against arbitrary rule and despotism, And is this not the most awful despotism? No despotism whatever, quietly rejoined Novodvorov. I am only saying that I know the path that the people must travel, and can show them that path. But how can you be sure that the path you show is the true path? Is this not the same kind of despotism that lay at the bottom of the Inquisition, all persecutions and the Great Revolution? They too knew the one true way, by means of their science. Their having erred is no proof of my going to err. Besides, there is a great difference between the ravings of ideologues and the facts based on sound economic science. Novodvorov's voice filled the room. He alone was speaking, all the rest were silent. They are always disputing, Mary Pavlovna said, when there was a moment's silence. And you yourself, what do you think about it? Nekhludoff asked her. I think Kryltsov is right when he says we should not force our views on the people. And you, Katusha? Asked Nekhludoff with a smile, waiting anxiously for her answer, fearing she would say something awkward. I think the common people are wrong, she said, and blushed scarlet. I think they are dreadfully wrong. That's right, Maslova, quite right, cried Nabatoff. They are terribly wrong, the people, and they must not be wronged, and therein lies the whole of our task. A curious idea on the object of revolution, Novodvorov remarked crossly, and began to smoke. I cannot talk to him, said Kryltsov in a whisper, and was silent. And it is much better not to talk, Nekhludoff said. End of Book 3, Chapter 14.